The train wheezed to a halt at Dry Creek Station, its black smoke dissolving into the pale November sky. Martha Harrison stepped onto the wooden platform, her worn blue dress rustling as she helped her 3 children down. Tommy 8, with serious dark eyes, Lucy 6, clutching a raggedy doll, and baby Samuel, barely too heavy in her arms. The platform stretched empty except for tumbleweeds dancing in the wind. Martha smoothed her auburn hair, tucked Samuel's letter deeper into her coat pocket, and whispered a prayer that this journey would finally bring them the home they'd been searching for since her husband's death 2 winters ago. Through the station's dusty windows, Martha spotted a tall man in a black coat scanning the platform with increasing agitation. Samuel Goretti recognized him from the small photograph he'd sent. Though his jaw seemed harder in person, his blue eyes colder, he held her letter in one hand, comparing faces to the description she'd written. When his gaze swept over her children, his expression shifted from anticipation to confusion, then to something that made Martha's stomach clench. This was supposed to be their salvation, the answer to months of correspondence about building a life together in this harsh but promising land. Samuel approached with measured steps, his boots echoing on the wooden boards. "Mrs. Harrison," his voice carried the weight of disappointment. Martha nodded, shifting Samuel to her hip while keeping Tommy and Lucy close. "These are my children," she said softly, pride and defensiveness mingling in her tone. Samuel's face darkened as he reread her letter, his fingers trembling slightly. "You never mentioned children," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain, while Martha felt the first crack in the dream she'd carried across 3 states. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. "I have children, not cargo," Martha replied, her chin lifting despite the fear coursing through her veins. Samuel stepped backward as if struck, shaking his head slowly. "I can't. I won't take on another man's children. This isn't what we discussed." Without another word, he turned and strode toward a waiting wagon, leaving Martha standing alone on the platform with her 3 children and 2 battered suitcases. The train's whistle shrieked as it prepared to depart, but Martha had spent her last dollars on their tickets here. There would be no going back to the crowded tenements of Chicago, no returning to the charity kitchens and the constant fear of being separated from her children. As the train disappeared into the distance, Martha gathered her children closer, their faces turned up to hers with trust she wasn't sure she deserved. The station master emerged from his office, a grizzled man with kind eyes who'd witnessed the entire exchange. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there's a boarding house in town. Though I should warn you Mrs. Whitmore's particular about her guests." Martha nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning. A woman alone with children, abandoned by her intended husband, would be viewed with suspicion in a place like Dry Creek. She hefted her suitcases and took Tommy's hand. "Come, children, we'll make our own way." The walk into town revealed a settlement clinging to life in the shadow of rolling hills. False-fronted buildings lined a single dirt street: Henderson's General Store, Murphy's Saloon, the Whitmore boarding house with its peeling white paint and judging windows. As they passed, conversations stopped and curtains twitched. A group of women in dark dresses whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes following Martha's every step. She could feel their assumptions like stones thrown at her back. Fallen woman, deceiver, trouble. Tommy squeezed her hand tighter, sensing the hostility, while Lucy pressed against her mother's skirts. This town had already decided who Martha was before she'd spoken a single word. Mrs. Whitmore stood on the boarding house porch like a sentinel guarding respectability, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her black dress buttoned to her chin. "We don't take in certain types of women," she announced before Martha could speak. The words hit like a physical blow, but Martha straightened her shoulders and met the older woman's gaze. "I'm a widow, seeking honest work to support my children. Nothing more, nothing less." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, studying Martha's worn but clean clothes, the children's scrubbed faces, the desperate dignity in Martha's voice. After a long moment, she named a price twice what Martha had expected, clearly hoping to drive her away. Martha counted out the money from her dwindling savings, each coin a small sacrifice that brought them one step closer to destitution. But she paid without hesitation, knowing this choice, to stay and fight rather than flee, would define everything that followed. Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised by Martha's determination. but she led them to a cramped room under the eaves with one narrow bed and a washstand. As Martha settled her children for the night, she made a silent vow she would prove herself to this town, not through defending her honor with words, but through the undeniable testimony of her actions. Tomorrow, she would begin the slow work of earning their place here. Dawn brought the sound of roosters and the distant clatter of wagon wheels on stone. Martha rose before the children, splashing cold water on her face and pinning her hair into a practical bun. In the mirror's cracked surface, she saw not the hopeful bride who'd stepped off the train, but a woman ready to fight for her family's survival. She woke Tommy gently, whispering instructions about watching his siblings while she searched for work. The boy nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who'd grown up too fast, his dark eyes holding the same determination that burned in his mother's heart. Henderson's general store smelled of coffee beans and leather, with shelves reaching toward a tin ceiling and barrels of flour lined against the walls. Mr. Henderson, a stout man with mutton chops and suspicious eyes, looked up from his ledger as Martha entered. "We don't need help," he said before she could speak, his tone making clear that her reputation had preceded her. Martha moved to the shelves anyway, her trained eye noting the poor organization and dust accumulating on higher shelves. "Your inventory's mixed up," she said simply. "Customers can't find what they need quickly. That costs you sales." Henderson's frown deepened, but Martha detected a flicker of interest behind his hostility. "I managed stores in Chicago before my husband died," Martha continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I can organize your stock, help customers, keep your books straight. All I ask is fair wages and the chance to prove myself." Henderson studied her for a long moment, perhaps recognizing the quiet competence in her manner, the way she'd automatically straightened a crooked display while speaking. Around them, the morning customers, mostly women, whispered among themselves, their attention focused on Martha with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring until Henderson finally nodded. "1 week trial, but any trouble, any scandal, and you're gone." That evening, Martha sat by the window in their cramped room, watching the sun set over the hills while her children slept. In her lap lay the letter she'd begun writing to Samuel Garrett, pleading for his return, but thanking him for his rejection. His cowardice had forced her into a situation where she could prove her worth on her own terms, without the compromises of a marriage built on deception. She tore the letter in half and scattered the pieces into the wind. From now on, she would write her own story in this hard land, one day at a time, one small kindness at a time, until even the doubters could no longer deny the truth of who she was. Martha's first week at Henderson's passed in a blur of reorganization and cautious interactions with customers. She arrived before dawn and stayed past closing, methodically rearranging inventory and creating systems that made sense. Tommy helped after school, stacking cans with military precision, while Lucy swept the storeroom and baby Samuel napped in a basket behind the counter. The women of Dry Creek watched this display of industriousness with grudging interest, though they still crossed the street to avoid direct contact. Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, lingered longest at the window displays, her stern face betraying flickers of approval at Martha's obvious competence. On Saturday, old Jake Wilson stumbled into the store seeking medicine for his ailing wife, his hands shaking as he struggled to count worn coins. Martha recognized the signs of desperate poverty, the too-thin frame, the patched clothes, the shame of not having enough. When Henderson quoted prices that made Jake's face crumple, Martha quietly added her own money to his pile, meeting the old man's grateful eyes with a gentle nod. "Your wife needs this," she said simply, wrapping the medicine carefully. Jake shuffled out with tears on his weathered cheeks, but not before squeezing Martha's hand and whispering a blessing that felt like the first genuine warmth she'd received in Dry Creek. Henderson, who'd witnessed the exchange from the back office, approached Martha with a complicated expression. "That's not how business works," he said gruffly, though his tone lacked real criticism. Martha continued arranging bottles on the shelf, her movements steady and sure. "Sometimes business means investing in community," she replied. "Jake Wilson's lived here 40 years. When his wife recovers, they'll remember where they found kindness." Word spreads faster than wildfire in a town this size. Henderson grunted, perhaps recognizing the truth in her words, though he said nothing more. That afternoon, Martha noticed him adding an extra handful of candy to children's purchases when their mothers weren't looking. Sunday brought Martha, her first real test of community acceptance. She dressed her children in their cleanest clothes and walked to the small wooden church at the edge of town, their footsteps echoing in the morning quiet. The congregation turned as one when they entered, faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Martha chose a pew near the back, gathering her children close, as whispers rippled through the assembly. Reverend Patterson's sermon focused on welcoming strangers and the Christian duty of charity, his eyes finding Martha's several times during his delivery. She listened with head held high, her presence itself a quiet declaration of her right to belong. After the service, Martha lingered while other families gathered in small clusters, their conversations growing quiet when she approached. Mrs. Patterson approached first, her face set in lines of disapproval but her voice carefully neutral. "Your boy Tommy seems bright," she said, studying the child who stood protectively beside his mother. "He could benefit from regular schooling if he plans to make something of himself." The words carried both criticism and possibility, door cracked open to acceptance. Though still guarded by skepticism, Martha thanked her politely, sensing the delicate balance of judgment and opportunity that would define their future here. Walking home from church, Lucy's small hand slipped into Martha's as they passed the cemetery where weathered headstones marked the town's short history. "Mama," Lucy whispered, "are we going to stay here?" Martha knelt beside her daughter, looking into eyes that held too much worry for such a young face. "Yes, sweetheart. This is our home now." As she spoke the words, Martha felt them settle into her bones with surprising certainty. This harsh, judgmental place would become theirs through persistence and love, through proving themselves worthy of the community's trust. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek, Martha felt the stirring of genuine hope. Monday brought an unexpected crisis when Martha arrived at the store to find Henderson collapsed behind the counter, his face gray with pain and his breathing labored. While someone ran for the doctor, Martha took charge with calm efficiency, organizing the concerned neighbors who'd gathered, dispatching Tommy to inform Mrs. Henderson, and ensuring the store remained secure. Dr. Mills, a young physician new to the territory, worked quickly to stabilize Henderson while Martha managed the chaos around them. Her natural leadership and unflappable competence impressed even the skeptics who'd watched her struggle for acceptance. With Henderson bedridden for the next several weeks, Martha found herself running the store entirely alone, a responsibility that both terrified and thrilled her. The daily challenges multiplied, managing inventory, handling difficult customers, balancing books, all while caring for 3 children and maintaining their precarious position in the community. Mrs. Henderson, a frail woman, overwhelmed by her husband's condition, gratefully accepted Martha's offer to continue managing the business. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she admitted, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The words marked a subtle shift in Martha's status from outsider to essential member of the community. As autumn deepened into winter, Martha's competent management of Henderson's became increasingly vital to the town's daily functioning. She extended credit to families struggling with the harsh weather, organized bulk purchases to reduce costs for everyone, and turned the store into an informal gathering place where neighbors could share news and concerns. Her children became familiar fixtures, helping customers and playing quietly in the corner while their mother worked. The women who'd once crossed the street to avoid her now lingered to discuss the weather and share gossip, their acceptance grudging but growing more genuine with each passing day. The first real test of Martha's growing acceptance came when the Morrison family's youngest child fell through thin ice on the creek, requiring immediate rescue and medical attention. Martha, who'd been closing the store, rushed to help, her nursing skills from caring for her own children proving invaluable in the crisis. She worked alongside Dr. Mills through the night, helping to warm the half-frozen child and comfort the terrified parents. When little Jenny Morrison finally opened her eyes and smiled, the assembled neighbors looked at Martha with new respect. She'd proven herself not just competent, but genuinely caring about their community's welfare. News of Martha's role in saving Jenny Morrison spread through Dry Creek like a warming fire, melting the last vestiges of open hostility toward her family. Mrs. Patterson invited Tommy to join the church school, while other mothers began including Lucy in their children's games. Even the men tipped their hats when Martha passed on the street, acknowledging her contribution to their tight-knit community. Henderson recovered enough to visit the store occasionally, found his business thriving under Martha's management and quietly decided to make her partnership permanent. The transformation from outcast to valued neighbor seemed almost complete. But Martha's growing success also attracted unwanted attention from Samuel Garrett, who'd been watching her progress with increasing interest and regret. He appeared at the store one December afternoon, his face bearing the hollow look of a man who'd realized his mistakes too late. "Martha," he said quietly, his hat in his hands, "I've been thinking, perhaps we could reconsider our arrangement." Martha looked up from her ledger, studying the man who'd abandoned her at the train station, and felt only pity for his weakness. The children she loved, the community she'd built, the life she'd created, all of it would have been impossible if he'd accepted her that first day. "I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train," Martha replied, her voice steady and sure. Samuel's face crumpled as he recognized the truth in her words. She'd grown beyond needing him, or any man, to validate her existence. Outside, a winter storm was building, the wind howling around the store's corners like a living thing. Martha watched Samuel struggle with his wounded pride and desperate loneliness, understanding perhaps for the first time that his rejection had been the greatest gift he could have given her. She'd found her strength in the very abandonment that had once seemed like destruction. The storm that night proved to be the worst in Dry Creek's memory, with snow piling against doors and wind that threatened to tear roofs from buildings. Martha's boarding house room, cramped but warm, became a refuge where she held her children close and listened to the howling fury outside. In the morning, the town woke to find itself transformed, roads impassable, several buildings damaged, and the railroad tracks blocked by massive drifts. It would be weeks before supply trains could reach them, and the community's survival would depend on careful management of existing resources. Martha opened the store despite the storm damage, taking inventory of their supplies and calculating how long they could sustain the town if rationed properly. Her methodical approach and natural leadership made her the unofficial coordinator of relief efforts, working with Dr. Mills and Reverend Patterson to ensure no family went without necessities. The store became a distribution center where Martha's fair allocation of resources and her refusal to let anyone pay inflated prices earned her the deep gratitude of neighbors who'd once questioned her character. Children who'd been taught to avoid her now sought her out for comfort and hot soup during the worst days of the storm's aftermath. Martha discovered Mrs. Henderson had been secretly ill for months, her condition worsened by the stress of her husband's recovery and the business concerns. Without hesitation, Martha began dividing her time between managing the store and nursing the older woman, bringing her own children to help with small tasks, and keeping Mrs. Henderson company during the long, cold nights. Her gentle care and practical assistance revealed a depth of compassion that even her harshest critics couldn't ignore. The whispered conversations now spoke of Martha's selflessness rather than her supposed moral failures. As the community pulled together in the face of winter's assault, Martha found herself at the center of a network of mutual support that had grown around her efforts to help others. Families who'd once treated her with suspicion now brought her soup when she worked late at the store, while women who'd crossed the street to avoid her began seeking her advice on everything from sick children to household management. Dr. Mills, impressed by her medical knowledge and calm demeanor during crises, began training her as his unofficial assistant. The respect she'd earned wasn't based on charity or pity, but on proven competence and genuine care for others. The arrival of Father Miguel, a traveling priest making his rounds through the territory, brought Martha an unexpected ally and the most crucial revelation of her journey. Unlike the rigid Reverend Patterson, Father Miguel possessed a warmth and understanding that immediately put the children at ease. During his brief stay, he observed Martha's interactions with the community and recognized in her the qualities of natural leadership and selfless service that he'd seen in the most devoted members of his far-flung parish. "God works through willing hearts," he told her quietly, "and yours has been open to serve this community in ways they needed but didn't know how to ask for." But the winter's hardships also brought Martha's most dangerous crisis when a group of displaced men, desperate and hungry, arrived in town seeking shelter and supplies. Their leader, a hard-faced man named Briggs, demanded free goods from the store and became increasingly threatening when Martha refused to deplete resources needed by local families. The confrontation escalated when Briggs grabbed Tommy, using the boy as leverage to force Martha's compliance. The store fell silent except for Lucy's frightened whimpers and baby Samuel's crying. while Martha felt the familiar terror of a mother whose children faced danger. "Take what you need," Martha said quietly, her eyes never leaving Tommy's frightened face. "But don't hurt my children." Briggs laughed harshly, sensing victory, but his satisfaction was short-lived. The store door burst open as a dozen townsmen, led by Henderson himself, stormed in, their faces grim with protective anger. "Let the boy go," Henderson commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made even Briggs step back. Behind him, Martha saw faces that had once regarded her with suspicion, now blazing with righteous fury at the threat to her family. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway with several other women, their presence a clear statement of solidarity. The standoff ended when Dr. Mills appeared with his medical bag and a quiet authority that somehow diffused the tension. He offered to treat Briggs' injured companion in exchange for their peaceful departure, providing a face-saving solution that allowed the desperate men to leave without violence. As they rode away into the gray winter afternoon, Martha found herself surrounded by neighbors who'd risked their own safety to protect her family. Mrs. Henderson, despite her illness, had struggled from her bed to stand with the other women in support. The community that had once rejected Martha Harrison now claimed her and her children as their own. That evening, as Martha tucked her children into their narrow bed, Tommy looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than his 8 years. "Mama," he whispered, "we're really home now, aren't we?" Martha smoothed his dark hair and nodded, finally understanding that home wasn't a place you found but a connection you built through love, sacrifice, and service to others. The room was small and cold, their future still uncertain, but they'd survived the worst winter could throw at them, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with them. She'd arrived as an abandoned bride seeking charity. She was now a cornerstone of the community, her worth proven not by a marriage certificate but by the countless small acts of love and service that had woven her family into the fabric of Dry Creek. Spring's arrival brought not only melting snow and muddy streets, but also a delegation from the county seat investigating reports of a woman of questionable character, running a business and corrupting community standards. Judge Whitman, a stern man with political ambitions and strong opinions about women's proper roles, arrived with 2 assistants and a predetermined conviction that Martha represented everything wrong with the changing frontier. He set up court in the church, intending to make an example that would discourage other women from overstepping traditional boundaries. Martha faced her greatest challenge yet, defending not just her reputation, but her right to the life she'd built. The makeshift courtroom filled with nearly every resident of Dry Creek, their faces a mix of concern and determination that heartened Martha even as fear twisted in her stomach. Judge Whitman read the charges with theatrical authority: operating a business without proper male supervision, corrupting public morals, and endangering community standards. Samuel Garrett sat in the back, his presence a reminder of the conventional path she'd rejected. But as Martha rose to respond, she saw a sea of faces that had become precious to her. Mrs. Henderson, still pale from illness but fiercely present. Dr. Mills, with his medical bag at his side. Henderson himself, looking stronger than he had in months. "Your Honor," Martha began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I stand before you not as a woman seeking to overturn proper order, but as someone who found her calling in service to this community." She spoke of the lives she'd touched, the crises she'd helped navigate, the children she'd nurtured, and the elderly she'd cared for. One by one, the residents of Dry Creek rose to testify on her behalf. Mrs. Patterson, who'd once viewed her with suspicion, spoke of Martha's dedication to proper Christian values. Henderson detailed how her management had saved his business and served the entire community. Even shy Mrs. Henderson stood to describe Martha's nursing care during her darkest hours. The testimony continued for hours, building an undeniable case for Martha's value to the community. Dr. Mills spoke of her medical knowledge and calm presence during emergencies. Families described her kindness during the harsh winter, her fair dealing at the store, her children's good behavior, and bright minds. Father Miguel, who'd returned for the hearing, provided the most powerful testimony of all. "In 30 years of ministry, I've rarely seen such natural grace in serving others. This woman embodies the highest Christian virtues: charity, service, sacrifice. To condemn her would be to condemn the very qualities we should celebrate." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of community support having shifted the balance entirely. Judge Whitman, clearly unprepared for such unified resistance, attempted to maintain authority by questioning Martha's moral fitness as an unmarried woman with children. but his arguments crumbled when Reverend Patterson, surprising everyone, including himself, stood to speak. "Your Honor," the minister said slowly, "I've watched this woman transform our community through love and service. If that's not Christian virtue, then I've been preaching the wrong message for 20 years. The final blow came when Tommy, Lucy, and even little Samuel were brought forward, clean, well-behaved, obviously loved children whose mere presence testified to their mother's character more eloquently than any words could. Faced with overwhelming community support and recognizing the political impossibility of condemning someone so clearly valued by her neighbors, Judge Whitman dismissed the charges with poor grace and warnings about maintaining proper decorum. As the courtroom erupted in celebration, Martha found herself surrounded by people who'd become more than neighbors. They were family chosen through mutual love and respect. Mrs. Patterson hugged her with tears in her eyes, while Henderson pumped her hand and declared her a full partner in the store. Even Samuel Garrett approached to offer his apologies and acknowledgement that she'd found something better than the marriage he'd offered. Summer brought new challenges and opportunities. As Martha's reputation spread beyond Dry Creek, other communities requested her help organizing relief efforts and managing resources during difficult times. She became an unofficial advisor to struggling families throughout the territory. Her wisdom sought by people who'd once dismissed women's capabilities, but she never forgot that her strength came from the community that had accepted and supported her, and she remained deeply rooted in the life she'd built in Dry Creek. On a warm evening in late August, Martha stood on the porch of the small house she'd finally been able to produce a real home, with rooms for each child and a garden where Lucy grew vegetables and flowers. Henderson's store thrived under their partnership, while her children grew strong and confident in the love of their extended community family. Dr. Mills had begun courting her with gentle persistence, but Martha felt no urgency to marry. She'd learned that a woman's worth came not from the protection of a husband, but from her own strength and service to others. If love came, it would be welcomed, but it was no longer necessary for her completeness. As autumn painted the hills in brilliant colors, Martha received a letter from her sister in Chicago, urging her to return to civilized society, now that she'd proven her point. Martha smiled as she shared the letter with her children, who'd grown tall and confident in their mountain home. Tommy, now 10, helped Dr. Mills with medical visits and spoke of becoming a doctor himself. Lucy, 8, had become the unofficial teacher's assistant and mothered every stray animal in town. Samuel, 4, charmed everyone with his quick smile and gentle nature. They'd all found their places in a community that valued them for who they were, not who society expected them to be. The first snow of the season found Martha in her kitchen, preparing preserves, while her children played nearby, and neighbors stopped by for advice, supplies, and companionship. Through her window, she could see the train station where she'd arrived almost 2 years ago, abandoned, desperate, carrying nothing but her children and her determination to survive. The woman who'd stepped off that train had been seeking rescue. The woman she'd become was someone others turned to for strength and guidance. The transformation hadn't come through marriage or charity, but through the daily choice to love and serve others, to prove her worth through actions rather than words. That evening, as Martha tucked her children into their own beds in their own house, surrounded by the security and love they'd built together, she reflected on the journey that had brought them home. They'd been rejected, scorned, and tested, but they'd emerged stronger and more complete than she'd ever imagined possible. Tommy read to his siblings from a book Mrs. Patterson had given him. Lucy's doll watched over them from its place on the shelf, and Samuel's sleepy breathing filled the room with peace. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow and sage, while inside, love filled every corner of the home they'd created through courage, persistence, and the understanding that family and belonging comes not from circumstance, but from choice. Martha had chosen to love this hard land and difficult people, and in return, they'd chosen to love her back. It was more than enough. It was everything.